I'd rather present this in English because that's what I'm doing usually, but we can proceed with the further conversation than in Spanish. But usually I'm used to doing this presentation in English, so please bear with me if I'm doing it like this. So basically, like Christina was very kind to introduce me, until the year 2008, I was the CEO of Europe's largest shopping mall, which was then sold in May 2008. So I was out of a job, but luckily not without any money, and I decided to do something useful with it. So I transformed myself into an impact investor, looking for big and scalable projects where I could do something good for the people, for the planet, while still making a good return. And the largest of these projects that I may be talking about now is what we're doing in Brazil, my friends and I. So this is called Amazon Sustainable Forestry, ASF in short. And basically, we can show you, please, next slide. And this is the problem that we're trying to find a solution for, or actually we have already found a solution. You can see from the dates in the upper right, in the upper left-hand corner of the biggest image, what happened in a very small part of the Amazon over the last 30 years. And these are just 1,100 square kilometers. This destruction has happened about 800 times for a total of 800,000 square kilometers. So that's a very big surface, nearly twice the size of Spain. And what we have found, there are many associations, and most of you are aware of, that say we have to save the Amazon forest, which is a good thing. But putting the Amazon forest under a glass canopy and not touching it, we think is not the solution. Why? You always have to think about the people living there and the politicians governing them. So if we go to the next slide, we have found a solution by which we try to protect the forest by using it sustainably. So we are cutting trees to protect the forest. By keeping the forest, not each tree, but the forest in place, we protect the climate. By managing the forest, we create employment. And that's why we get the support of the local communities. And as investors, we also get a return. How do we do this? Please, next slide. So we implement sustainable forestry operations, which means that we keep the forest as it is on 80% of the surface, extracting the old trees before they die and rot, and transforming 20% of the surface into a fast-growing, high-value hardwood forest, like teak, mahogany, parica, etc. By doing so, we maintain all the positive effects that the forest provides, which once the forest is cut could never be provided. Please, next slide. And whatever wood we're harvesting goes into our certified sustainable wood processing plants, which have a 0 CO2 emission footprint, because we take the sustainably sourced wood, we produce hardwood or softwood products like plywood, and all the scraps, the sawdust, all that is not transformed into our high-value sustainable product is then used to generate sustainable energy at our biomass electricity plants in the factories themselves. So in a nutshell, we are doing something which is commercially viable, and we have found a way how to protect the forest by working with the Brazilians and not just try to be the first world colonialist that with a finger tell them you do not have to cut your forest, you have to protect it. And the Brazilian quite understandably tell us, well, you Europeans, you Americans, go plant the trees in your own countries, you already cut them. So this is basically it. And perhaps we can still see the last slide by showing that what we are doing is really scalable. So right now we are processing about 100,000 cubic meters of wood every year. But this is just equivalent to 1,000 hectares, no, 1,000 square kilometers of forest, the sustainably sourced product of 1,000 square kilometers of forest. But the Amazon is incredibly large because it's 4.2 million square kilometers. So this is a system that could be expanded many times and replicated, and while doing so, providing jobs for the local population, protecting the forest, protecting the biodiversity, ensuring that water is continuously evaporated from those trees. In short, thinking not only about short-term profits, but thinking about providing a long-term solution for people and planets. So that is the presentation, and yes, the opportunity. This was a presentation that I made for investors, just by showing that they could join us because the Amazon is so huge that even if I personally invested already some money into this, there is still enormous space to make that bigger and to acquire more land and to replicate this many times. So the presentation, I think, is over, so we can revert to the speaker view.
Am I sharing the screen, or I have stopped?
No, the screen sharing is stopped. So I see you and the people listening. So perhaps I will tell you more than the presentation. Perhaps you're also interested how I came about to do these things and why I have these ideas. So, like Christina said at the beginning, I was born in Italy. I went to school there. I spent 8 years with the Jesuits in Torino, and then I went to the engineering school studying mechanical engineering. So hardly something that qualifies me for forestry. Bueno, puedo también hablar español porque aquí estamos hablando no de la presentación, entonces puedo también, creo que eso podría ser más fácil para ustedes.
Some of them are native speakers, English native speakers, and the teacher who is with them are English.
So they're English. Okay, then let's keep to English. Okay, no problem. Listen, I do most of my business in English, so that's fine with me. Where was I? Yes, so I was born in Italy. I went to school in Torino. Then I went to university studying mechanical engineering in Torino. And then I started working for the also a family company, because my mother is Austrian, even though I'm Italian, and half my family is in Austria. So from the side of my family, we had this company doing real estate, and this company ended up developing, building, and owning the largest shopping mall in Europe, which was located in Vienna. And in 2000, I was from 95 to 2008, I was the CEO of that company. And then in May 2008, that company was sold. So I was out of a job, but luckily I had some money to invest. And like I said, I tried to do this into impact investing. What is impact investing? Impact investing means that you try to do something good for the environment, for the climate, for the people, in short, for the planet as a whole. But you try to do this while still making money, that is in a commercial way. Why do I think it is important? Because it shows that business making money does not necessarily have to be something bad. On the contrary, money is just a tool, and a tool can be used as a force for good. And the more effective you are in doing this, the better it will be for not only your own pockets, but also for all the people that you're associated with and the places where you're having your business. And many times I get asked the question, but isn't it much better to leave the forest as it is? And I'm usually answering something which is perhaps not intuitive at first glance, but sometimes you have to go against your first impression in order to really do something which is good and lasting. You have to imagine that Brazil is a very, very huge country. I mean, with more than 8 million square kilometers, that's nearly 20 times the size of Spain. But it only has about 5 times the population of Spain. And most of the Amazon, which is half the size of Brazil, is nearly empty. So to still have lots of very poor people in Brazil, which have no land, which have no way to make a living. And so since 40 years ago, Brazil started a policy of saying land without people, that is the Amazon, for people without land. And by doing so, they started developing, opening up the Amazon, many times with not exactly the best effects on the environment. And what we are trying to say is not stop it, don't do anything, because then the people and the politician would come back to you and say, hey guys, that's all very nice, but what can we do for those people? How can those people earn a living? How can those people eat? And so we developed a system by which, instead of saying, no, you don't have to touch the forest, we rather inspired ourselves from sustainable forestry, which was developed already in the 16th, 17th century back in Europe, and coincidentally also in Japan, where people who realized that overexploiting the forest for a certain time left them without wood that they would need, both as a fuel and as a construction material for the later years. So this concept of sustainable management of forest was created in the 1600s in Europe, And like I said, parallel to this, for different reasons, also in Japan. And of course, you can be forgiven if you drive or if you are on a boat in the Amazon and for hours, days, or even weeks, you see forest after forest. It doesn't seem to end. But we realize that we have to do something in order to protect this forest, because otherwise, sooner or later, you will be at a tipping point. It is not the fact that you will run out of trees for wood, because the tragedy is that most of the trees in the Amazon are not even used but are burned just to make space for land for pasture, which is then used by cows. You will run out of the positive effects that this forest provides, be it biodiversity, be it evapotranspiration. We now start to understand that the evaporation, one big tree can evaporate between 1,000 and 1,500 liters of water every day. So it's thanks to this evaporation, which doesn't happen on a flat pasture, that you don't have erosion on the ground, and that you have lots of humidity in the air that then comes down as rain, not only in the Amazon, but in the agricultural region south of the Amazon, where you have a big agro industry producing soybeans and other things for export. So even the industries that were deemed to be responsible for the desmatamento, how they say it in Brazil, or the destruction of the forest in the past, are now starting to say, well, guys, stop with the destruction of the forest. We already have enough land to produce, to use for agriculture. But if we won't have the rain that comes from the evaporation in the Amazon, we won't have any agriculture. So slowly the mentalities are changing, and you have to realize that the Amazon is also important because it really provides this reservoir of biodiversity, which is extremely important. And we think that by finding a solution, by using a forest in a sustainable way, that is, you only cut the trees which are already 200 to 150 years old. A tree can be very beautiful when it's big, but it's not a cathedral. So a tree starts very small, it grows, it accumulates CO2, transforms it into wood. But when it dies, all that CO2 goes back into the air. So everybody who's telling you that the Amazon is the lung of the planet is actually telling you a lie. It's important to keep the Amazon alive for many different reasons, but not because it produces oxygen. An old forest, a forest older than 250 years on average, is normally carbon neutral on average. Why? Because the trees grow and absorb carbon, produce wood. But when the trees start to die, and there are very few trees that live longer than 200, 250 years, when those trees start to die, well, they fall down, and then insects, bacteria, fungi start to decompose those trees. And they don't accumulate in the earth because the layer of humus, depending on the geography, is more or less constant. So in the Amazon it's 30, 40 centimeters. In farther north it can be up to 1.5 meters. But carbon doesn't accumulate in the soil. So an old forest is carbon neutral. You only keep it as a carbon sink, and this is why you have to protect it. But only a managed forest has actually a positive balance, because the wood that is then cut at the sawmill and transformed into construction material or floors, that can be very beautiful, but it also is very long lasting. It can last for decades, even centuries. And all that wood is CO2 stored. And when you take out one big tree out of the forest, all of a sudden you make space for the sunlight to reach the ground in the forest and for young trees to grow. So on average, the amount of CO2 stored in a managed or an unmanaged forest is more or less the same. But the amount of CO2 released is much lower in a managed forest. So actually, only by managing the forest, you can have a positive CO2 balance. And on the other side, you also give work to the local population. So to me, this is a solution that has really, it ticks all the boxes. And this is why I'm passionate and I would like to expand this. Perhaps just to give you some more ideas, the Amazon Sustainable Forest is the biggest of my projects, but I also have some other sustainable projects, like in Portugal, right behind, past the frontier with Spain, behind the Rio Guadiana. I have one of the biggest solar photovoltaic power plants, which is under construction on my land near Martinlongo. So if one of these days, when COVID emergency has finally passed, you'd like to make an excursion from Sevilla and see a very nice way of producing electricity on a large scale, without any pollutants, without any noise, this would be a nice place to visit.
I had my micro off.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I'm sure the students have some questions. So Mr. Steve is with them in the classroom. So is there any question, or may I start?
We do have some questions.
Okay.
We're just deciding who wants to ask a question first.
Okay.
It's going to be Aina.
Okay.
Wait a second, Aina.
I'm not hearing anything.
And
Aina, we can hear you.
hola, my internet is not going.
No, okay, wait.
Slight Wi-Fi problem. Aina has come to me to ask the question.
Okay.
I would like to know what was the first time you invested in something?
Well, let's say the first time I really was in charge of an investment was when I was 18 years old. That was back in 1977. And back then, the Communist Party had some very big electoral successes in Italy. So my father back then said, well, you know, I don't think the communists will take over power in Italy, but just in case, let's invest in a country. So if we have to flee, we won't be refugees, but we will be landowners when we arrive. And so we went to Argentina. That's why I started learning Spanish when I was 18 years old. And we planted our first 1 million trees over the next years. So you could say that the first investment that I was in charge of, I mean, it was still my father's money, but I was the one feeling responsible for it. This was done when I was 18. And I still have it until today, so I've been doing it for 43 years.
Ina says thank you, and that's a very interesting story that came from that question. Thank you. Sophia, who also wants to come here and ask the question, because I'm the focal point. Sophia.
Hello, I'm Sophia, and I want to ask a question. Are you proud of what you have done, what you have achieved in life? Do you regret anything that you did?
I didn't quite get which life.
No. Are you proud of what you achieved in life, and do you regret something?
Well, let's say I'm quite happy with what I achieved, but you know, I see life as work in progress, exactly as I see money as means to an end. I always tried whatever I did to do it as good as I could do it. And one of my favorite mottos is luck is when preparation meets opportunity. And this has served me well during my life because I've always been a very curious person and I've always tried to be a positive person, making everything that I took care of or everything that I did, leaving the world better than I found it. And so until now, I was quite successful. If I regret something is that I didn't focus on impact investing a bit earlier, but in my main job as CEO of Europe's largest shopping mall, I also tried to do it in the best possible way, providing jobs for many people and having something that was truly sustainable and working well in the long term. There seems Ina.
Sophia says thank you. Next is Carmen, who is also coming here. And then Nuno, who has a working microphone. Miraculous. Carmen.
Hello, I'm Carmen and I am going to ask you a question. What is the difficult choice that you made when you are investigating?
A difficult choice you've made when investing?
Well, you see, investments are risky because you already have some money. And first, don't lose it. Like many wise people have already said, this is the first criteria for investments. And the second criteria is to get a decent return for most people. But I have a third criteria to do something good while I'm getting this return. And I want to prove, and I'm already proving it with the things that I did, that you can get good returns even while doing something good. And I may have an advice for whoever goes into investing after having been an entrepreneur. When you are an entrepreneur and you have your own business, you're like a race car driver, you know, the hands on the wheel and the foot on the accelerator or the brake. So you're totally in control, and whatever happens, you can overcome any obstacle if you're a good driver. The problem is when you start to be an investor, you're like being in a taxi. Somebody else is driving. So you have to choose the taxi driver and the car in which you're from then on riding as a passenger very carefully. Because if something happens, you're not the one at the wheel, somebody else is. So investments, being an engineer, I'm very good at analyzing, you know, the data, and having studied engineering served me very well in my life. So I would advise any person who would like to study engineering. It's an extremely good preparation for whatever else you would like to do later in your life. But in order to be a good investor, you also have to have a good feeling for the people you're associating yourself with, or the people to which you're giving your money. And so either you do this kind of due diligence yourself, or you get somebody to do it for you.
Thank you. Mr. Steve, I want to remember you about Anna and Maria that are in Belgium, in case that they have a question. So we have
Okay. Let me check the chat, but first, Nuno, can you turn your mic on? Yes?
Hello, my name is Nuno, and I want to ask that do you visit the Amazons like some certain time, or did you go to the Amazons one time?
Well, Nuno, thank you for the question, because I forgot to tell you one thing during my presentation. I have a few criteria for my investments. First, one of the criteria is to speak the language of the country where I'm investing. So when I invested in Argentina, I started to learn Spanish. And when I started to invest in Portugal and then in Brazil, I started to learn Portuguese. And this, of course, because I want to go there. I want to see the investments. And I've already been, before COVID, I was in Brazil 2-3 times every year. And the last time I was there, I came back on March 8th, 2020, when this whole thing, the COVID thing, already started to begin. I got on one of the last flights when it was still possible without problems to go to and fro. If you really want to invest, and I would always advise you to know what you're doing, and to first gather some experience before you do it yourself. But as they say, trust is good, control is better. So go there for yourself, ask the questions, be there, and you'd be surprised how many ideas you might have as an outsider who's not taking care of these things day by day, that are essential so that the company can be a success. But of course, you also need trusted people on site. Yeah, so you need to have both.
Okay.
Thank you. Another question from Aina.
Yes, I saw she was raising her hand very intensely. Please go ahead.
Someone got their volume on?
No. You have learned many languages and you know many languages. And from your experience, what was the harder one to learn to speak?
Well, you see, if I may say, so I had the privilege, like I suppose some of you also have, to grow up bilingual. Because my father was Italian, my mother is Austrian, so at home from the age of 3 years old, I spoke both languages, German and Italian. And speaking 2 languages from the beginning is helping you very well in order to understand how these things can go. But I started the most important advice I can give is not which language is more complicated or less. The most important advice is not to be afraid of making mistakes. Okay, so I learned most of my languages, especially the later ones, by listening to people, by watching TV, by reading, and then by trying to speak, hopefully with people that were very patient, so that I could make my mistakes, but I never stopped speaking because I was afraid of making mistakes. Many people that I know, especially some girlfriends that I have, are afraid of talking. Yes, you know, I'm ashamed. I don't want to make a mistake. I know I don't yet speak it well. I say, well, you know, speak, make mistakes, let yourself be corrected, and then you learn. And that's the easiest way of learning. And yeah, many times, don't be afraid, try. If you fail, try again, let yourself be corrected. And the more languages you learn, you know, languages are like money, you know, they're not something good per se, they're only as good as what you do with them. And languages are a mean of communication, so the better you can use them, the more people you can reach out to, and the better you can communicate with them.
Thank you from Ina. Very interesting answer. Antia.
My question was, how has COVID-19 affected your area of work?
Well, given the fact that we're in a public forum, I won't use any swear words, but I would be really tempted to use them, because in the past, you know, being a pilot as a leisure profession, but also an engineer, and having business in Brazil, in Portugal, in Austria, in Italy, I was usually jumping from one plane to the next 2-3 times a week. And right now I'm here in confinamento, mostly in my home in Marbella, so at least I have nice weather, but it's quite hard. And many people that owe me money, that have contracts by which they should already have paid, have started to say, well, you know, we have a contract, we know we have to pay you, but we don't have the money because we had problems with COVID, blah, blah, blah. So luckily I was not yet sick, and health is really the most important thing. So I can only be grateful for that. But unfortunately, it has somehow created problems also for me. And I hope that when most of the people will be vaccinated, like the European Union is saying, by the end of summer, life will be back to a more normal way of doing things as it was before.
Thank you. Next question. Sophia.
Hello, I'm Sophia again. My question is, when you were a child, did you think did you use what you learned in school in your career? So did school help a lot in your career, or did it, yeah, you get what I mean?
Well, I can tell you a story which I learned in school when I was learning Latin, and I thought that Latin had absolutely no use for me, so I hated it back then. But this story that I had to translate from Latin, I still remember to this day, and actually it was already a Latin translation from a Greek story, and it goes like this. A philosopher was on a ship, and the ship was in a tempest. It was shipwrecked, and it arrived on the shores of Greece, which was then Magna Graecia, still a Greek colony. And so he survived, like most of the guys in his ship. And after a while, they reached the next town, and after a while, they were all healthy and strong, and there was another ship going back to their motherland, to Greece. And most of the guys left, but the philosopher was already old. So he said, you know what? I don't want to go again on a journey. I want to stay here. And they asked him, well, what message do you want you to relay to your to the motherland? And he said, well, my fellow Greeks should give their children something that cannot be taken away by sea wreck, by fire, by war. And then they ask you, but what is this? They say, well, give them the best possible education. And, you know, this is a story that I heard, I think I was 14 at the time, so it was quite a while ago, but it still resonates with me to this day. And I could tell you many more other things, but mostly, you see, the languages I learned partly in school, but not only in school. I mean, Italian, of course, I had to learn it because I went to school in Italy. German, I never had a German grammar book. French, I learned also like this. English, I learned at school. Spanish and Portuguese, I didn't learn at school. So learning is not limited to school. School gives you a framework. School teaches you how to learn. And this is why I was quite pleased that so many of you, especially even the girls, had some ideas of becoming engineers, because being an engineer is one of the best foundations in my view. I mean, I had to develop projects for an engine, for a turbine, and when I studied for my pilot's exam, my engineering skills were quite useful. But engineering helps you analyze everything. And no matter what somebody tells you, if you studied engineering, most of the detailed exam that you take in engineering school, you won't need, because engineering teaches you mostly how to make certain things like construct engines or design something. But the engineering school teaches you a way how to think, a way how to analyze problems. And I think some of my success came from the fact that on one side I was flexible enough to learn the languages outside of school. You know, some people just go to university to learn what I learned as languages. But I could take my time to become an engineer, and having this kind of mental structure to deal with any kind of problem, any kind of business that was put in front of me because of the analytical skills that I developed as an engineer. I hope the answer was not too long.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Sophia says thank you. Another question? More questions? Carmen, who's only
guys, I see that we have 8 girls and 5 guys, and usually the girls are the shy ones, but I hardly heard the boys speak.
We've only had one question from a boy, I think. Carmen.
Fun until yes.
So, if you give us an advice for the future, what would be?
Well, I would have many advices that I could give you, and the advices are not to say you have to do this. I can only share my experience and tell you what worked for me. So the first experience that was very positive for me was to learn languages and to learn them by going to the country. I mean, I hope COVID will soon pass, so you will be able to do so. And by doing a total immersion and not doing like my Italian friends who went to England to study English and then spent all the time with their Italian friends in England. So they didn't learn a thing. So you really have to get out of your comfort zone, spend time with different people, get into a different culture, and so you really will learn another language. So this will open your perspectives. Travel and languages, this is something extremely important. Second, study something that helps you in the future. So it's not so important that you're already focused on the kind of work that you will be doing in the future, but try to acquire skills that help you manage any kind of possible desafío, how do you say, of possible challenges that you might have in the future. And then last, I mean, I came quite late to it, but I thought this is my passion now, this impact investing, because you see, especially in Catholic countries, many times making money is seen as something, yes, you have to do it, but actually blessed are the poor because there's the reign of heaven. My personal take on this is slightly different. Money is only as good or as bad as what you do with it. And if you have more money, or if you have lots of money, and you have the right mindset, you can use it to do many, many good things. So the more competent you are, the more successful you are, the better you can be if you do it in impact investing by actually leveraging your knowledge to multiply it and to do good things for the world. And last, my last suggestion, I once met an old pilot colleague while I was waiting for our own plane. And you know, the guy seemed really a cool guy, he was smiling very broadly. And I was talking with him because I usually try to talk with other people just to know what they're thinking, what they're doing. And I don't know how we landed there. And he said, you know, I'm the luckiest person on earth. I said, what do you mean? Well, you know, I'm doing what I like best, flying, and I even get paid for it. So the last experience that I can share is if you make your passion, if you make your hobby, if you make what you like to do best your work, you practically won't have to work a single day in your life because you're just following what you like to do best.
Carmen says thank you. Ina, again, who's winning for the questions?
On the second one.
So, when you were a child, did you know your career was going to be like this? Did you want to like be this, work in investing when you were a child, or did you want to be something else?
Well, let's say, unfortunately, I don't see anymore the main screen, but do you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. I don't know why it has changed.
Okay, so basically, you see, I had different ideas when I was younger, but I had a very clear idea, which I still have today, about nearly 50 years later. And the clear idea is, I knew that by learning hard, being very good at what I was doing, there is a very high probability that I was going to be successful, that I was going to make, that I was going to have a successful career. And then the occasions that presented themselves, I couldn't know, but I needed to have a mind. You know, I always say, I'd like to go through life with open eyes in order to recognize what's out there, with open arms and with an open heart, to be able to embrace and be passionate about the different opportunities that present themselves. And this can be both in a business sense, but also in a relationship sense. So stay curious, stay open, and it's good to be focused on something, but rather try to be focused on the big picture, not on the way of getting there. I always make the example, near Torino we have a mountain which is called the Monviso, and you have all the Alps which are more or less at the same level, and then the Monviso is a peak like this in the middle. Okay, so to me it's like aiming for the Monviso. This is the peak that I want to reach, and when I'm taking a motorway, a country road, or where I'm driving with a 4x4 through the fields, I know the road is not so important as long as I have the goal in front of me. And I don't, and I can even take some detours because I find them interesting. But I never should miss the goal from my side.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we have run out of time, because now the students have to reflect on what they have heard and what they think about it. So is there any last question, Mr. Steve?
No.
So thank you very much, Mr. Totta, and you are very welcome to our school once COVID is over.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation, and perhaps we can organize something on my property in Portugal once this is over.
We will be looking forward to visiting you.
Can we have a round of applause as well, everybody? Thank you very much.